Welcome back to the Best of series brought to you by 65hurls.com. Go there for all your sticks, loads of matches, championships in full flow at the moment. So go there for all your sticks, 65hurls.com. Shane, we're going to a topic that's fairly close to both our hearts. We probably didn't choose to be in this category or anywhere around this category, but the best man marker. It's fair to say probably not the most stylish job to be given or to be detailed, to be picking someone up, but nonetheless a massively important role, particularly in modern hurling.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, let's say you've got the stylish centre back or a wing back who's a tasty player and is able to deliver the ball nicely to the forwards or carry it or whatever it might be, and you want them on the ball as much as possible. And then you've got an ape like yourself or myself, and you're told you just go out and shut down one of their good players. I don't care if you never puck a ball, you're just out there to mark your man. A bit like the traditional centre forward, who, you know, the way centre back would have always been the best player in the team, especially growing up when you've got only so many good lads on the team. But the centre back is told, go in and be a nuisance, or centre forward, be a nuisance, and I don't care if you never hit a ball, just make sure he doesn't. So that's kind of the job we've been given.
Talk to me about some of the personality traits. If I was to give uh, the one word I would use to describe a man marker would be miserable. I think you have to be miserable. You have to have a bit of a misery kind of a streak in you, because essentially, like, you're the antithesis of what a good match kind of needs. You're kind of basically trying to shut down the best players. You're trying to get in their face, and I would say to be miserable is one of the best traits you need to have to be a man marker. What would you think yourself? What
I
are
think
traits that are needed?
you have to be anti-sport, anti-hurling. One of these lads who takes joy out of shutting everything down and spoiling the game. And you have to go out there with that mentality of, I'm not really here to be a celebrated player. I'm probably going to be unpopular because people will see me just shadowing my man the whole time, you know, niggling him, pushing him, whatever it might be. I think you have to be one of those lads who actually revels in it. And maybe you also understand your own limitations, that you're not that tasty sort of a hurler, and that you're thankful you do have a role. Because sometimes you see these guys who can't really hurl. And at inter-county level, everyone, of course, can hurl. But more so at club level, that there's some lads who start ahead of the guy who's got a tasty pair of hands, because you know this lad, he'll actually do a job for you. And it's not a case of he's a wing back who'll try and hit the ball more than the wing forward. He's a guy who has no interest in hitting the ball, and he wants to make sure that you have no interest in hitting the ball.
You have to be unbelievably selfless to do it, don't you? You have to derive as much satisfaction out of pulling a jersey or getting a flick in as another fella gets out of a score. You basically have to be in the opposition player's togs. You have to be, basically, you're a spoiler. Essentially, you're spoiling him, and you're in a sense trying to spoil the game, because while everybody loves these, 127 to 126 games, I'd much prefer the arm wrestle where the forwards are getting it really, really tough. They're getting it in their face. It's 15-14. I remember when Clare were beating a pint by Cork in the All-Ireland semi-final, 16-15. It was a real arm wrestle of a game. And I remember the other semi-final was a real high-scoring game. It was the time Galway beat Kilkenny 5-18 to 4-18, and everyone was lauding this. And I literally thought that the 16-15 was better, just because it was in their face. Everything had to be earned. And I suppose when you're playing that kind of man marker role, everything your man gets, he really should have to earn it. And you have to be teetering on the laws of the game without going over them, because if you're giving away 3 or 4 frees, you're kind of negating the role that you were given to do. So it's a difficult kind of balancing act there. Just even the type of personality, something you mentioned there as well. You can't want to see your name in the lights, because you're not going to. That's the nature of the role. I remember I used to try and even earn a cornerback for Offaly. There was some days where you might try and hit ball, and then you realise, God, if I'm hitting ball, yeah, it looks grand, but he's going to hit 2 or 3 points. So are you going to be kind of try and be miserable that day, or are you going to try and get on ball? And it's a difficult balancing act. I think the best players, the really elite that we'll talk about, are able to do both, which is unbelievably hard to do, because you have to switch from, okay, I have to stop him getting the ball, to me getting on the ball and actually trying to express myself then as well. But as you said earlier on, you mentioned about the old centre forward role. Just kind of thinking about, like, he was the classic man marker back in the day. He was basically shoved in on the centre back, told not to let him hurl. As you said, the centre back, and still rings true today, the centre back is usually one of the best players on the field, but you're told not to let that centre back hurl. Whereas now, I think teams go away from the centre back. They go through the hand, they maybe try and draw the centre forward out. You mightn't engage with the centre forward that much. You'll play the flanks a lot, you'll play the corners an awful lot more. So that kind of centre forward, I think at an inter-county level, that John Power type player just doesn't really exist anymore. Because I think a lot of teams, you don't lorry ball down on top of the centre back, and a lot of teams would think, like, if you had a lad like that, he's going to get on the ball now, and is he going to be effective on the ball? That's the thing. So that centre forward player is kind of redundant, definitely at county level, I'd say, anyway.
Yeah, because like in the past, you'd nearly want your centre forward be good at doubling on the ball in the air from a puck out, and sort of soften the centre back. That's the way you'd be looking at it, soften that style of centre back. But it's moved on from that. One thing we definitely need to talk about here is that I don't think we necessarily are going to be talking about cornerbacks or fullbacks here, because by definition you have to mark your man anyway. So you could definitely have Sean Finn down as one of the best man markers, but what he'll essentially do, as far as I see it, and there's probably exceptions to this, but he'll pick up someone in the fullback line and he'll move across to fullback if he has to, he'll go to cornerback if he has to, and maybe roam a little bit because some of the inside forwards do that. Maybe Richie English would do it, but he's rarely going to go and follow a guy out to centre back or follow him out to wing back or even midfield. So I don't necessarily think we need to talk about those lads, because everyone in the full back line always marks their man.
Because I think a man marker basically signals a structural change, that if you're man marking a guy that comes in corner forward and he goes centre forward, you're picking him up. If he goes wing forward, you're picking him up. If he goes midfield, you're picking him up. So I would say the likes of Barrett, he's a brilliant man marker as well when a lad comes in, but that's what a cornerback is supposed to do. That's what a fullback is supposed to do. Would he ever follow a man out to wing back? Very, very rarely, I would say. I'd say Sean Finn as well. They'll generally hold their position either cornerback or fullback. So I don't think those lads are going to be towards the very, very top end of that conversation, because I said that's part of their job description already. I wouldn't necessarily say they're man marking, but definitely within the tip ranks, I would say we have two of the matters, I would say, that would be picking up different people or designed to pick up different lads on different days. And I suppose like Brendan Maher is a classic example of that last year, realistically.
Yeah, I mean, if you go through some of the big games that Tip would have played, he even went fullback against Darren Gillan in the Munster final. Then he was following Rory O'Connor out the field for Wexford, then TJ Reid. So he was moving with them no matter where they went. Now the obvious exception was towards the end of the Kilkenny All-Ireland final. He would have stayed a little bit out the field, and I think it was possibly Ronan Maher who picked him up at that stage. Ronan Maher had been on Colin Fennelly. Some of our viewers might be able to add to that as well. Feel free to get your comments in. But I think Brendan Maher definitely did that job an awful lot. He was even the spare man against Laois, so there's an awful lot of versatility there. And we saw Bursley in the run to the Munster title and the All-Ireland final, that he was kind of, I think this is slightly different now. He wasn't man-marking the best player, but what he was doing, and at times he did, because Pádraig Mahoney in the Munster final, but what he was often doing was man-marking, we'll say, the roving wing forward, with the idea being that he'll be able to attack, because that roving wing forward will drag him up the field where he can actually get scores. So there's a slight twist on that one, but definitely he'd fall into that bracket.
That's an interesting one as well, because if you put a cornerback, a sticky cornerback who's always played cornerback, and you put him out wing back, essentially you're probably losing one of your platform. You're losing one of the lads that's going to direct the play from half back. So if you have a half back or someone like Brendan Maher who can mark a lad really, really tightly and shut him out of the game, but can also kill you from 100 yards or can also kill you with a delivery, like it's one thing. It's kind of like the Philly McMahon tactic in football, marking the gooch, and he's a man marker specifically on the gooch. He's going to try and put him on the back foot. He'll mark him really, really tightly when the ball is up there, but he'll try and put him on the back foot as well, and it maybe expose him going forward. So if you have the capabilities of a lad like that at wing back that can do that as well, you're in dreamland really. And Ronan Maher can do the same as well. You see Ronan Maher even playing fullback, he can kind of picking up Conor McDonald, and he's been designed for other different players in different games. But if he gets a chance, he can also kill you at the other end, which is huge, because something like that just wouldn't have been seen 5 or 10 years ago. I don't think there would have been too many wing backs that would have been capable of shutting down a man and also really hurting him at the other end.
Here's a question for you. Did Conor Browne do the best man-marking job of 2019 by shutting down Cian Lynch when Kilkenny shocked Limerick in the All-Ireland semi-final?
Brendan Maher had a fair list of them now as well, but that was huge for an unheralded player to come in and do what he did. Like Keane Lynch
on the hurler of the year.
Yeah, he was totally negated out of that game, had very little of an influence on it. He was kind of swallowed up by Brown and then others anytime he got the ball. He did a brilliant job. And I thought it was funny to see actually this year. I think Brian Cody kind of played on that. The fact that he was probably fairly raw, maybe not unbelievably good on the ball at county level. I'm sure he'll definitely come into it over the coming years. But he put him cornerback in the league this year with the idea of, well, if he's able to shut down, a midfielder and has all the pace and power to do that, and is, like, without being smart, is miserable enough to do that and sacrifice his own game to do that, maybe he could work as a cornerback. Now, he got a bit of a baptism when he was on Shane O'Donnell. Now, that's a fair baptism to get against one of the best attackers in the country. But it was interesting to kind of see Cody's thinking on that, and the fact that maybe he could turn a lad who's naturally played midfield into a cornerback because he had that kind of man-marking instinct.
I don't think... Like, man-marking someone at midfield is so different to the full back line. Now, the half-back line, I think that's not too bad of a spot to be man-marking. But just to stick with Kilkenny for a minute, other than the 2011 All-Ireland final, when, of course, everyone knows about Jackie Tyrrell man-marking Lara Corbett, who'd done all the damage the year before, it's not really something that you would typically associate with Kilkenny. Of course, their full back line will mark people and pick people up. But it's not that often. We don't see that Conor Brown job happen all that often, do we?
No, and I think Brian Cody is sweet enough on matchups and trying to get the matchups right. But if a matchup, he will not change 3 and 6 for Love Nor Diamonds, because he's kind of a big believer in the pillar of that defence. So, like, you won't see Hugh Lawler playing cornerback if he's told to pick up Callan and Callan goes corner forward. You rarely will. He will usually park himself at the edge of the square. Now, sometimes he might move the odd time, but particularly when Noel Hickey was playing there or when JJ was playing there. I know JJ said after the 2012 final that he was kind of following Canning, but he was following him too far out the field and he was getting dragged away. And they're very good at learning from their mistakes, and they usually try and keep 3 and 6 fairly solid. But yeah, like, apart from those kind of tactics, no, they're good with matchups and stuff like that. If a lad comes in on you, or if they're switching corners, that you'll stay following them. But they won't usually change the shape of the defence too much.
Yeah, and like, just from experience, Matty Kenny would always try and keep the 3 and the 6 in the one spot if he can. And maybe he would definitely like matchups. He's big into the matchups. I know I did him a few times, especially in his early days with Kula, and he does it with Dublin, Shane Barrett. Davy Fitz now, he's a perfect example of a guy who has man-marking jobs. Matt O'Hanlon is the most obvious one. He generally picks up the most dangerous roving attacker, whether it is I think last year it was John McGrath, and obviously he's done it with Joe Canning a number of times. So definitely Davy Fitz and Matty Kenny would do it for sure.
Yeah, see, it's an interesting one when you're playing a sweeper, because in the more than Waterford back in the day, like, Noel Connors was able to, he was designated for Conor Whelan in the All-Ireland final, and he was to try and keep him quiet. He was designated for Alan Cadigan in the All-Ireland semi-final and was able to keep both of those lads quiet. But you do have that luxury of, I only have to worry about my man and the ball. That's all I have to worry about. I don't have to worry about anything else. I don't have to worry about if a ball goes in behind me, the sweeper will be there. If a ball is in front of me and I flick it out, the sweeper will be there. That's why, like, I'd have Matt O'Hanlon high up and I'd have Sean Murphy high up in the conversation too, but I couldn't have them at the very top because they have that comfort blanket. That's the only thing I will say.
Yeah, but at the same time, like, I know you were going to bring up Owen O'Donnell doing it to TJ Reid. I think it was in the 2018 Leinster campaign. Yeah. But Dublin were playing a sweeper that day also. So he was able to do it with the comfort, knowing that if I go for this ball and I get spun or turn, I just need to keep pressure on TJ. And I had that day Sean Moran as the sweeper behind me. So I think you could rule out a lot of lads for this.
I agree with you, and that's why I would say that if you're man marking and are able to do it to a really high level without a sweeper behind you, now that's gifted stuff. Like, while it's not going to be maybe heralded, and in fairness now, Brendan Maher was probably the most heralded man marker in hurling history last year, I would say, because I haven't heard too many lads getting as much plaudits as he did last year, and he was probably in the conversation for probably like top 4 to 5 hurlers of last year. And then what was brilliant to see was the fact that he was able to go and hurl with Bursley and hurl a different type of a role again, and even transform it even more, having been maybe a small bit shackled with tip. But going back to Wexford for a second, so you talk about Matt O'Hanlon and Sean Murphy be usually the two boys that would, be designated there in the half back line, and you see Paddy Foley may hurl centre back sometimes. If Joe Canning hurls wing forward, Matt O'Hanlon will pick him up, and Sean Murphy will pick whoever is up the other side. But the fact, and we talked about it earlier as well, the fact that they're able to go forward and punish lads going forward, like you saw Sean Murphy last year put Bubbles on the back foot and set up Conor McDonald's goal. He was the man putting the ball across the square from the end line. Bubbles is back somewhere where he never thought he'd be, somewhere where he doesn't want to be. In the Leinster final a couple of years ago, Matt O'Hanlon had, I think he scored the same amount from play, if not more, than Joe Canning did that day.
He scored two.
He had him on the back foot again. So I always kind of think it's an interesting play, particularly with Davies kind of, he kind of tries to talk about his kind of total hurling philosophy where anybody can get forward. And even the fact that they're designated man marking roles and they're still getting forward just kind of leads into that philosophy. But I will go back on what I said. It's so much harder to play a man marker when you don't have any luxury of anyone behind you, like basically helping you out if you do miss a ball or anything, if you get a flick or anything like that. So while Matt O'Hanlon and Sean Murphy do great jobs, I don't know if I'd have them in the top 3 or 4.
Just to add in another one for Sean Murphy, he was man marking Danny Sutcliffe last year. If memory serves me correctly, he scored 3 points on him going in the other direction. So I think he's really accomplished at that. And that's a guy who changed from being the sweeper a couple of years ago to a different role. And I'd say, you'd only be human if your confidence was down a little bit, having been so good at one really important role, seeing Kevin Foley excel as he takes over and sort of maybe evolves that position. But he's done so well out as the sort of wing back / man marking job as well.
It's a fair effort to go from not marking anyone for 2 years to go to turn out to be a really good man marker, because it's a total shift. And that's a question we've had about Tyke de Bourke in Waterford as well. Will he be able to go from being a sweeper to a man marking full back, centre back, or wing back? Or like hurling ball is one thing, but you can't forget about your man as well. He hasn't marked a man for a good few years at county level. So Sean Murphy has done that admirably, in fairness to him.
And you know what? You can't man mark people the exact same way. Like, there are some players that would have, and I would have said this about Alan McCrabb, who would have played for Dublin, and Crave Kieran, that if you stand too close to him when you're running with him, he'll do a sidestep and you're kind of sent for a hot dog. Whereas other players, they may not have a step and they may not be, great change of direction. And those lads, you can be stuck inside in their jocks. So I think the best man markers know how to do that and adjust to the situation. And in general, like, once you get sidestepped once and the guy sends you off in a different direction, goes, collects the ball, throws it over the bar, you kind of learn your lesson very quickly.
Yeah, no, you definitely do. We're going through talking about Galway as well. I think Dottie Burke falls into the earlier conversation of he generally marks who comes in around the square and will not be moved from there. The only exception probably being Seamus Callan when he kept him out of games in 16 and 17, and even went cornerback if he had to, just to stay on him. And in fairness, he seems to be the one player that Callan just can't handle.
Actually, do you know what? I think that was the fatal flaw for Galway in 2016. Callan went out to the corner, John McGrath went in full and actually ended up snapping a ball over Daithí Burke, scored a goal and set one up. So I actually think that they definitely learned a lesson from that one too, going into 17.
Yeah, no, I'd say so. And even going into in 17 as well, because they had the luxury of Aidan Hart playing sweeper with Tyke de Bourke playing sweeper at the other end, Gerard McInerney was able to basically follow Ozzie Gleeson everywhere he went, and he definitely didn't necessarily play a traditional centre back, but they had Aidan Hart who was able to drop into the hole. And then, funnily enough, Aidan Hart is very, very versatile. He played sweeper all that year when they won the All-Ireland in 17. He's played wing back and corner back, and just thinking of it, and I can't think of any examples offhand, but I'm sure David Connors, Patrick Early, and a few Galway guys that are closer to the scene maybe than me would say, I'm fairly sure that he would have been their designated man marker in the last year or two, even anyway, that he would have had to go cornerback if it was picking up a lad, or even wing back picking up a fella as well. But they don't have that fella, maybe that Brendan Maher player that could play anywhere across the six and would specifically actually man mark someone, and you could actually pick him out and say he's going to be a man marker. But saying that, before last year, I don't know if I would have picked Brendan Maher as a man marker like that either. So perhaps that player is there and we don't know about it. But Galway they're definitely not alone in that respect. Like, you go through Waterford and you're thinking, Noah Connors is off the Waterford scene at the moment. I
And
mentioned
it's cornerback anyway. It's a cornerback anyway.
He's a cornerback anyway. Phillip Manning would have played wing back, even dropped in centre back. Would have often kind of tried to spoil lads. And you're kind of thinking,
he had the Joe Canning job in the 2017 All Ireland. Had a rough start to the game, but then actually was really, really good thereafter.
He did, yeah. But you're wondering now with the new look kind of Waterford team, who will that man marker be? I'd say Conor Prunty's going to be more of a fullback than a man marker, I would say. And I think it's a common theme across a good few counties. Like Clare, if you go down through the Clare defence, yeah, Pat O'Connor, David McInerney, these guys are all good defenders. Jack Brown, don't think any of them are specifically man markers. I think Cork would be the same as well. Apart from when they put Steve McDonald on TJ last year in the All-Ireland quarter-final, like a cornerback who hadn't started all games. Fair enough, he was captain a few years before that. He hadn't started all games, and then they started him centre back basically, just to pick up TJ. So it's one of the few times I can't specifically think of too many times that Cork have gone with a man marker.
No, and then like even with Galway, the only one I can think of, and I know you mentioned Aidan Hart there, but like Gerard McInerney in the All Ireland of 2017 against Austin Gleeson, I felt for 45 minutes of the game that Austin Gleeson was on top in that battle. Not majorly, but he was probably edging that battle. But because Galway go on and Ozzy doesn't have the ending to the game that he'd want, it's then seen that he completely dominated that matchup. So I'm not 100% sure on that one. But yeah, it's definitely a fair point. Some counties probably naturally do it more than others. Some, maybe it's just down to the way they play. Like we were talking before we started recording here about Conor Fogerty. Would he man mark? And maybe he's done it the odd time. You mentioned his job on Ozzy Gleeson a few years ago in an All-Ireland semi-final. But if I jump back to the 2019 quarter-final against Cork, Kilkenny were under an awful lot of pressure, and rather than man marking and trying to follow these very fast, lithe Cork forwards, what they did was they just sat back in front of the full back line. The work rate went through the roof from the half forward line and all the forward line, and there was times when you looked out in the field, Cork had their inside forwards, but Conor Fogerty and maybe Paddy Deegan, there was some other defender, was more or less just sitting on the 45, and Cork had nowhere to hit it.
Yeah, so they didn't have to man mark lads out again. They just kind of filled the space and worked unbelievably hard, and probably didn't feel that Cork were going to hurt them maybe out the field because all their scores were coming inside from Horgan and Cadigan. But interesting. I don't think when you talk about elite man markers, I don't think we're spoiled for choice. And it's funny because I don't think it's something necessarily that's been coached anymore. I think you're more being coached to get on the ball, look up, be very, very skillful, obviously, be able to pick out passes, be able to drill balls. And I don't think man marking is necessarily being coached as much now. And I think it's similar enough in football, but I think every team definitely needs at least one man marker. We talked briefly about Dublin. I think Shane Barrett would probably fall into the category of a man marker in that he could play fullback, cornerback, wingback, or centre back to pick up a lad. And he's actually that perfect type of a player where he's not going to be exposed for height or strength, no matter where he's playing, or speed.
Yeah, exactly. And he did it against Kevin Moore, and I think 4 or 5 years ago, it was that quarter-final. Ger Cunningham was over the Dublin team, and it was in Thurles, and Maurice Shannon, I think, came on and scored a goal. It was a bit of a row, I think, with Liam Rush and someone else the same game. But Kevin Moore was shaping up for sort of hurler of the year type territory, and obviously Waterford would have had to go all the way for that to happen. But Barrett completely shut him down in the game, and I thought, wow, this is a serious sign of a player. And he's done it in the league semi-final against Limerick last year. I feel like it might have been Gerard Hegarty. Someone might correct me on that. But he's right up there. And you're 100% right that you have to be tall enough so you're not going to get exposed in the air, have the speed so you're not going to get done on the ground, and the mentality too, to just be able to keep with it. Because a lot of the time when you're man marking someone, it's because they're of a superior quality to most other players. They probably will get a score or two, but you just can't let the head drop. So there's so much involved in being a man marker.
Interesting point you made there. If your man marker is 5'6", 5'7", 5'8", you're leaving yourself open to be got at, basically. Like, there's no reason why, if the man they're man marking is 5'10", 5'11", even, you park him in the edge of the square, and even you throw in a few high balls. You want your man marker to be. That's why, as I said, a Shane Barrett, a Brendan Maher comes in perfect. They're jack of all trades, really. They can play any of those positions. They have the pace, they have the strength, they have the power, they have the aerial ability. They're good on the ball, and that's why I think, to me, when I look at the elite of the elite, I probably wouldn't have seen him as a man marker up until last year. But the fact that Brendan Maher could do that to all the best forwards, basically the best forward on each of the teams that they played against, and basically keep them out of the game, he'd probably be number one for me. And I know, listen, you don't exactly need your arm twisted to go for a Tipperary or a Bursley player, as I'm sure people will acknowledge fairly quickly. But to do that in a string of games last year, and on the back of coming back from a cruciate injury, to put all that together, to put that body of work together, is absolutely phenomenal, and he'd be up the top for me.
Yeah, I think my integrity would be questioned if I keep picking Brendan for best at whatever. So I won't pick him here, but Brendan, we know, right? I'm going to give it to Matt O'Hanlon, just because he's had such tough tasks against a Galway team that was, like, up until the last couple of years, Galway were, like, there was a couple of years there where Galway were beating Wexford and beating them well. And he was crucial to it. Like, Joe Canning was making Galway tick. There was that Leinster final in 2017. He got 2 points off Canning. I remember him snapping a ball, playing really well, driving him the other way. And you wondered, would Matt O'Hanlon be as good going in the other direction, considering, he'd previously been a fullback with the team. So I'd have to pick him, even the job he did last year on John McGrath when he did his cruciate. Or was it his cruciate? But he had a very bad knee injury and he played on anyway. I just think pretty much every day he goes out and plays, he's really, really impressive. He's done good jobs on TJ Reid as well. Obviously, TJ is going to get a few scores, and that's part of the thing. You're going to have a score or two put on you. So I think the fact that so often he's against these absolutely elite level forwards, and rarely is he ever taken off that man, or rarely do you think he didn't do a great job there. I give it to Matt O'Hanlon, even if they do have a sweeper, because most teams have extra players back anyway. That's just the reality of it, and they try and defend in numbers in different sort of ways. So for me, it's Matt O'Hanlon.
Be really, really interesting to hear what our viewers think as well. Maybe there's a couple that we forgot. If there is, just comment below on the YouTube channel or comment on Twitter as well. Thanks a million, Shane. We'll see you again next week for the next best of.
Yeah, and just to convert, brought to you by 65hurls.com.